In part 2 today, we are going to look at osmoregulation in animals. This is important because before we get to excretion, we have to talk about how animals osmoregulate in general, and then we'll talk about the role that the excretory system plays in that overall regulatory scheme. In general, there are two strategies for osmoregulation that we see in animals. The first and the simpler of the two is to be an osmoconformer. This just means that the body fluids are at equilibrium with the environment in which you live, which is almost always seawater. So these organisms, things like jellyfish and marine flatworms, these are going to be isoosmotic, meaning on net, there is no net movement of water into or out of their body. It's at equilibrium with the surrounding environment. Because living organisms require ions in their cells, you can only be an osmoconformer if you live in a marine environment. So you can't do this in freshwater because cells won't be able to function with that very low level of ions. We're not going to talk about osmoconformers. Beyond that, I just want you to know that that is one way of approaching this problem. Just go with whatever the environment is doing, and that works for smaller, simpler animals that live in the oceans. The second strategy is to be an osmoregulator, and this is where you control the internal ionic content of your body independent of what goes on externally. This is really important because it means you can live in an inhospitable environment or in a variable environment. And just to give you an idea of what we mean by variable, think about salmon, where they start off, they hatch in a freshwater stream, they will swim out into the oceans, they'll spend their life in the saltwater ocean, and then to reproduce, they will swim back up the same rivers and streams, back into the freshwater environment. You can't go back and forth like that unless you are an osmoregulator. We can look at two different examples of fish here and see kind of how different organisms deal with the challenges of their environments. So first we can look at a marine environment here. In a marine environment, the challenge is that you're constantly going to be losing water to the external environment. So we see lots of loss of water through the gills. So they're going to lose water via their exchange surfaces. So as a result, fish in a marine environment actually need to ingest water. They basically need to drink water in order to survive, because if they don't do that, they will dehydrate because they're constantly losing water to that saltwater environment via exchange surfaces like their gills. In contrast, freshwater fish have a different problem. They don't have to drink a lot of water because they're going to gain water via diffusion through their exchange surfaces, because there's a greater concentration of ions in their body fluids compared to the outside environment. So water on net is going to diffuse in. This means that freshwater fish are going to just pee out a bunch of water. They're going to excrete lots of water because they're constantly getting more water than they need. Going back over to the saltwater here, they minimize their water loss with their metabolic waste because they lose so much water via exchange surfaces. So we have two different environments if you live in the water as an osmoregulator. If you are in a marine environment, you need to drink water constantly and minimize its loss via excretion because you're constantly losing it via gas exchange surfaces and diffusion. If you're in a freshwater environment, you gain your water osmotically and you're constantly excreting excess water because you always have more than you need coming into your body. Of course, there's one more place you can live that has a different set of problems. Terrestrial vertebrates have to constantly deal with the specter of dehydration. We lose water from our lungs, we lose water from our skin, like when we sweat, we lose water via our digestive system, and we lose water in our urine when we excrete nitrogenous waste. So terrestrial vertebrates have to have mechanisms to recover water and maintain their water balance despite these challenges. We can prevent desiccation or water loss by having a waterproof body covering. So like our skin is waterproof. You're not just going to leak water through your skin. We have sweat glands, of course, that can be a source of water loss, but other than that, we don't lose water through our skin. Another adaptation to prevent desiccation is nocturnal behavior. If you're active at night, it's typically going to be cooler, so you're less likely to lose water to the atmosphere. So we have nocturnal behavior as an adaptation to preserve water in your body. We also have lots of ways to replace water in our bodies. We can, of course, drink water, and this is the primary way that most terrestrial vertebrates are going to get their water, although not all of them. We can also get water directly from our food. So if food is very moist, it has a high percentage of water, we can absorb that water in our intestines and get it that way. And then there's a really cool mechanism called metabolic water. Think back to last semester when we talked about cellular respiration. One of the byproducts of cellular respiration is H2O. Well, a lot of organisms are really good at sequestering that water rather than getting rid of it. So like, for example, we actually exhale a lot of that H2O, but organisms that live in deserts are really good at keeping that metabolic water in their body. And in some cases, that's where most of their water comes from. The last thing we can do is minimize water loss by concentrating our urine. So human urine is about 4 times as concentrated as blood in terms of the solute concentration, the amount of stuff that's dissolved in it. And blood is already highly concentrated. Well, desert mammals take it a step further. Their urine can be up to 20 times as concentrated as their blood, which means they are severely limiting the amount of water that they're losing via excretion. So this is really important if you live in an environment where you don't have the opportunity to drink a whole lot of water. So to summarize osmoregulation in general, we see that water movement is based on the solute content and the difference between the solute content in the body and the environment. There are 2 main strategies we see in animals. You can be an osmoconformer or you can be an osmoregulator. And the strategy that you use is going to be based on your environment and your morphology. If you're small and simple and live in the ocean, you can be an osmoconformer. If you're bigger and more complex, you need to be an osmoregulator. And then depending on whether you live in the ocean or in freshwater or on land, you're going to have a different set of processes that govern how osmoregulation works in your body.